name is Olivier Lissa, and I will present the first talk and chair this session. So, in this talk, I'm talking about the emergence of biodiversity patterns through deep time, and it's a joint effort between me, Calvi Deighton from the University of York, and Hélène Morland from Paris at the École Normale Supérieure. I'll start very briefly with a theoretical overview. We can say that equilibrium paradigms are very important throughout biology, and without them, we probably wouldn't be able to make much advance in our science. It's prevalent in theoretical biology. I'm just going to present a few examples. The Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium tells us when a population has been disrupted from its equilibrium condition. We can use equilibrium model to infer and predict the conditions that are necessary for the competitive coexistence of two or several species. And also it allows us to infer whether a particular natural history strategy is evolutionarily stable and impervious to the colonization of other strategies. In microevolution too, equilibrium paradigms are very important. As its name implies, in the equilibrium theory of biogeography, we wouldn't be able to use it if we were not assuming the existence of an equilibrium. And then more recently, with diversity-dependent models of diversification, it also kind of implied the existence of an equilibrium. Not necessarily, actually, because although the diversification rates could decrease, it doesn't necessarily need to decrease to zero. Okay, but the first point that I would like to really raise here is that in microevolution, the equilibrium has really been only contemplated in terms of species richness. We know next to nothing about how other biodiversity patterns actually approach and reach an equilibrium. So in this talk, really what I would like to do as a first aim is to understand a little bit better how biodiversity patterns emerge through time, and indeed if they are reaching equilibrium. And I mean here by biodiversity patterns, not just species richness, but pretty much all macroecological and phylogenetic patterns of biodiversity. All the questions that I will try to answer today fall under the umbrella of a path to equilibrium. I'm not going to talk very much about the patterns themselves, but really focus on how quickly or not they converge to an equilibrium. So first, how is each pattern changing through time? Are they all reaching an equilibrium state? And if so, how quickly are they reaching that state? And does it happen all at the same time? Now, there are no data sets of real systems that allow me to answer those kind of questions. So I'm kind of obliged to use simulation to make some advance in these questions. I use the Hubble unified neutral theory as a starting point, not because I particularly believe that it's the gospel truth and nothing about the species is important to explain the diversification, but it has convenient properties with just a few parameters which we can contemplate a vast diversity of scenarios without having to work out exactly how the species differ from each other. And I use the cellular automata, hence treating space explicitly, to simulate the diversification process according to simple stochastic rules. And changing the parameters of these rules to do with speciation and dispersal in this case should allow us to look more closely at the interaction between processes and what the impact is on patterns. So a cellular automaton is a very common computer product. It typically uses a grid. Here I've populated that grid with individuals that are all of species 1. And then we use a birth-death process of individuals, dispersal of those individuals, and every now and then a speciation process as well, in order to generate progressively a more complex and more interesting grids to analyze, where here each color represents a different species. For that cellular automata, I'm talking about the construction of 3 events. So first, we need to identify or pick an individual as the parent of an offspring, that offspring disperse in the grid, and where it lands, it precipitates the death of the occupier and takes its place. Now that's not the typical way to approach Hubble neutral theory, but that way of computing is much faster and has exactly the same dynamical properties than the traditional way to do things. The grids that we have followed have 1 million individuals, so 1,000 rows and 1,000 columns. We have 1 million of those triplets of events constituting one generation, and we follow those grids for 1 million generations, or 1 billion of those triplets events. Obviously, that takes quite a while, and even in C++, it takes between 12 and 24 hours for one run to complete. Okay, now we are approaching different combination of parameters or rules. The first thing that we have looked at is global dispersal, where any offspring can occupy any cell in the grid from any point of origin, or local dispersal, where typically a dispersal occurs within a radius of about 10 cells from the parent. We have also contemplated 3 different modes of speciation. Point mutation is a traditional way to look at the neutral theory, where each new species starts with one individual, and all the other individuals of the parent remain or are retained by the other species. Then we have a 5% rule, which is kind of akin to a peripheral mode of speciation, where 5% of the parent species gets allocated to the new species, and the other 95% are allocated to the sister species. And then finally, random fission, where it's any random number, any random proportion, so it can be as low as 1 and 99%, or as close as 50-50. And on average, that means that with the random fissions, we get about a partition of 25%, 75%. And finally, we have looked at 3 different rates of speciation. I call them high, medium, and low, because we couldn't apply exactly the same rates for the 3 speciation modes. And although we would have liked to do so, it wasn't practical, as you are going to see in a minute. The high, medium, and low rates for the point mutation rate is equivalent to generating 90 speciations per generation, or 30 or 10, therefore a factor of 3 separating those different modes. And then for the 2 different speciation modes, we have a more modest 1 speciation per generation, or 0.2 or 0.04. Right, so we generate, therefore, on a regular occasion, outputs from those simulations, and here we can follow how species richness increases through time. Typically, I'm going to use a unit of time that is a time step, which is 1,000 generations. As you can see here, in this particular case, it evolves quite quickly towards an equilibrium. Here, the 20 runs or replicates for each set of parameters, you can see that the increase in species richness is quite straight and fairly similar from one run to another, but after that, there is a bit of variation that will obviously impact on the results. Okay, so the first thing we need to figure out is how to actually calculate the time to reaching equilibrium. And that's not as straightforward as it sounds. First of all, because if we wait for 99%, let's say, of the value to be attained, we get to a very flat part of that curve, and therefore the time becomes very variable. As a compromise, we have decided to go instead for a value of 90%, close enough to the asymptote, but not so close that it becomes too variable. Okay, so we need to fit a model. This one is no good because it generates residuals that have a strong tendency at the beginning. If we are a little bit more discerning in our choice of model, we get residuals that behave better, and it's that model that I've used throughout to summarize those trend lines. First of all, in terms of species richness, I have my three modes of speciation: random, 5%, and point mutation. As you can see, there is a strong power law relationship between the number of species that exist at equilibrium and how long it takes to reach that equilibrium. But beyond that, there is also the fact that although the speciation rates only differ by a factor of 3 for that speciation mode, whereas it differs by a factor of 5 for this one, you can see that the impact is much stronger, both in terms of species richness at equilibrium and time to reaching that equilibrium. So it basically tells us that the point mutation mode of speciation is very sensitive, much more sensitive than the other two in changes of speciation rate. The other thing that we could work out is that there is actually not, for those parameters, there's not that much difference between global and local dispersal. We pretty much get the same values for equilibrium and time to reaching that equilibrium. A different measure of diversity, which is the exponentiated Shannon index, we get pretty much the same relationship. But where things start to become a little bit more interesting is when we look for how quickly that particular measure of diversity reaches equilibrium compared to the first one in terms of species richness. And as you can see, when we look at the relative time to reach equilibrium, for the random fission, those two measures basically converge at the same time towards the equilibrium, whereas for the 5% speciation modes, it takes about 50% longer for the exponentiated Shannon index to reach equilibrium compared to species richness, and for the point mutation it takes even longer, something like five times. Right. So I have just 1 minute to finish, so I'll go very, very quickly. With a species abundance distribution, you can summarize it in many different metrics, and those indices will also take some time to reach equilibrium. For all the random fission, it actually converges to equilibrium much more quickly, and species richness. For the others, it can take longer. For species area relationship, other indices can be found, and here we see more a distinction between local and global in terms of value at equilibrium, but not really so much in terms of time it takes to reach those equilibrium. And then finally, something that is a little bit more interesting is in terms of phylogenetic structure. It takes a very, very long time to reach equilibrium. This is basically the end of my runs after 1 million generations, and basically the time for reaching equilibrium is predicted to be even longer than that. Same thing for gamma. If you look at it, this is 10 million or 100 million generation. Again, well beyond what I could cover in that run. Finally, why is that important? Well, the gamma and the phylogenetic pattern takes so long to take equilibrium that actually looking at what their value is at equilibrium is nonsense. A system is never going to remain at equilibrium for that long. And more importantly, if we focus at a time scale that is basically what a system follows as it approaches equilibrium in terms of species richness, we can see that measures of phylogenetic tempo, which was said to be inaccurate or incompatible with a real system, all have negative values, which is what we expect from a natural system. And therefore, it reopens the possibility that some scenarios of mutual theory are still compatible with explaining biodiversity patterns, not just in terms of species richness or spatial patterns, but also in terms of phylogenetic patterns. And I'm sorry, that's all I have time to tell you.